The scent of antiseptic lingered in the sterile air as Emily Thornton lay motionless, her fingers twitching against the coarse hospital blanket. Tubes ran from her arms and machines beeped softly at her side. She had lost almost half her blood during the emergency cesarean. The doctors had said it was a miracle she had survived. Charles hadn't stayed long after the birth of their twin daughters. He had kissed her forehead, offered a tight smile, and left with a promise to return. But he didn't. Instead, it was the hospital's night nurse who helped Emily learn how to hold her babies without wincing in pain. It was the nurse who whispered words of encouragement when she broke down at 3 a.m, unable to latch her child properly. Not Charles. Not even his mother, the ever-regal Margaret Thornton, who called only to ask if Emily would try again for a boy. Emily returned to their home in Surrey 2 weeks later. The family estate stood grand and cold, its ivy-covered walls hiding the chill that crept into her bones. Charles barely glanced up from his tablet when she walked through the door. "You're looking tired," he said. "The nanny starts Monday." No embrace. No warmth. Only timetables and expectations. Emily, still sore and weak, forced a smile. Over the next few weeks, Emily noticed the changes. Charles had removed her name from the household accounts. She was expected to ask for money. He gave her £300 a month, less than what he spent on one dinner with clients in Mayfair. When she questioned it, he told her she didn't need more. After all, she wasn't working anymore. That had been his idea too. "Leave your job at the firm," he'd said. "Be at home with the children. You'll love it. I'll take care of the rest." Now, she couldn't even buy baby formula without justifying the purchase. Then came the final insult. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Emily returned early from her mother's cottage. The twins had fallen asleep in the back seat. She crept inside, hoping to surprise Charles. She found him in the lounge with another woman. The woman wore her scarf, sat in her chair, laughed like she belonged there. Charles didn't even flinch. "You're home early," he said, as if she'd interrupted a meeting. Emily didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned and walked back to the car. The twins stirred, but she kept driving. Around the block. Through the rain. And when she parked again outside the estate, she knew everything had changed. Not just her marriage, but who she was. She would not beg. She would not stay silent. And she would never, ever, ask for money again. Emily stood in the drawing room of the Thornton estate, sunlight slanting through the tall windows, catching the dust in golden streaks. Her twin daughters, Lily and Beatrice, were outside with their nanny, chasing butterflies in the garden. It should have been a peaceful scene, the sort a woman dreams of after marriage. But inside Emily's chest, there was only unease. The silver-framed photo of her and Charles on their wedding day rested on the mantelpiece. She stared at it, searching the smile on his face for something she had missed. There had been a time when Charles had looked at her with pride. When had that changed? It had started subtly, like a hairline crack on fine china. He would come home later, with vague explanations of meetings that ran over. He had stopped touching her shoulder when he passed, or placing a kiss on her forehead when she was half asleep. His absence had become a presence all its own. One evening, while Charles was away on another so-called business trip in London, Emily walked past his study and noticed the light was still on. Curious, she stepped inside. His laptop was open. She hesitated. Emily had never been one to snoop. But something had shifted in her lately, something raw and instinctive. She sat down and opened his email. The first few messages were mundane. Work schedules. Theatre tickets. But then she saw it. A name that appeared again and again, Juliet Hale. With trembling fingers, Emily clicked the thread. "Last night was beautiful. I can't stop thinking about your hands. I miss you already. Her stomach clenched. There were photos too, candid shots in dimly lit restaurants, a hotel receipt, even a message joking about how the Surrey air was good for a married man's alibi. Emily closed the laptop slowly. Her breath was shallow. There was no denying it now. The man she had risked her life for in childbirth, the man whose name she bore, was unfaithful. But it wasn't the betrayal that struck hardest. It was the ease with which he'd lied. The performance, the manipulation, the smooth continuation of a facade. She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she went upstairs to the bedroom and opened the locked drawer of her writing desk. Inside, a journal, her mother's, lay undisturbed. She had kept it all these years, a quiet reminder of a woman who had once been in her exact position. On the first page, written in her mother's delicate cursive, were the words, "If he ever makes you feel invisible, make him regret not seeing you." Emily smiled faintly. The next morning, Charles returned. He kissed the girls on their heads and greeted her as if nothing had happened. She watched him with new eyes, cool, assessing, no longer deceived. "How was London?" she asked, tone neutral. "Productive," he replied with a yawn. "Long days, dull dinners." She nodded. But something in her had shifted permanently. Emily Thornton had once believed in fairy tales. But now, she was preparing for war. Autumn crept into Surrey with a hush, colouring the trees in ochres and rust. Emily wandered through the garden, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, the wind sharp against her cheeks. Each step felt like treading a line between who she had been and who she was becoming. She stopped beneath the great oak at the far end of the property, where Charles had once proposed. She remembered how he had knelt in the frost, a trembling velvet box in his hand, how she had laughed and said yes before he'd even asked. That girl, naive, hopeful, felt a world away now. She fingered the edge of her coat pocket. Inside, her phone buzzed softly. It was a message from Edward Langford. Edward was an old friend, well, more than a friend once, before Charles. They had studied literature together in Edinburgh. He had gone on to become a solicitor with a quiet reputation for discretion and a knack for prizing truth from tangled messes. "Coffee this week? I'm in town for a few days. Thought of you." Emily stared at the message, her thumb hovering. He didn't know, not yet, but he would. She needed someone outside the Thornton name. Someone she could trust. She replied, "Yes. I need to speak with you." Back at the house, Charles was hosting his cousin Rupert in the study, their voices low and muffled behind the door. Emily moved quietly past them, unnoticed. She was always unnoticed these days, unless she made a fuss, or dared to speak out. Then she was accused of being ungrateful, hormonal, sensitive. The next morning, she met Edward at a quiet tea room in Guildford. He stood as she approached, taller than she remembered, his greying temples adding something noble to his otherwise boyish charm. "Emily," he said warmly, pulling out her chair. "You look tired," she offered, with a sad smile. "No. Stronger." They ordered tea and scones, made a bit of small talk, but Edward sensed her urgency. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a stack of printed emails, placing them between them like evidence on a courtroom bench. "I need your help," she said quietly. "But more than that. I need to reclaim myself." Edward studied the pages, frowning. He asked gentle but precise questions. She answered them all, her voice steady, her resolve clear. "You realize," he said finally, "this could get messy. He'll fight back. Not just with money. With influence." "I'm not afraid of mess anymore," Emily said. "I'm afraid of disappearing." Edward nodded slowly. "Then we start with securing your position. Financials. Custody. Documentation. You're not alone." Emily exhaled. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in her chest eased. Not because Edward had a solution, but because someone finally saw her. Listened. Believed her. As they stepped outside, a light drizzle began to fall, washing the dust from the cobbles. Emily looked up at the grey sky and whispered, more to herself than to Edward, "He'll never see me coming." What she didn't know was that back at Thornton House, Rupert had overheard her conversation on the phone the previous night. And now, Charles knew more than he let on. Rupert's shoes tapped rhythmically across the marble hallway of Thornton House as he approached Charles's private study. He didn't knock, he never did. His presence was assumed, and his loyalty expected. Inside, Charles sat with a glass of scotch in hand, staring out at the rain-laced windows. "She met Edward Langford yesterday," Rupert said flatly, taking the chair opposite his cousin. Charles turned, but not in surprise. "I know." Rupert raised an eyebrow. "You know." Charles sipped his drink. "She's not as discreet as she thinks. Besides, you left your phone in the corridor." The recording was quite informative. Rupert gave a quiet laugh. "So? What now?" Charles stood, walked to his desk, and opened a small drawer. Inside lay a folded document marked confidential. He placed it on the table. "This," he said, "is our leverage." The document held financial statements. Not illegal, but cleverly distorted to paint a picture of a woman incapable of managing her own affairs. Combined with staged testimonies from selected staff, it would be enough to challenge her credibility in court. And more importantly, paint Charles as the steady, reasonable husband. "She wants war," Charles muttered. "She'll get it." Meanwhile, Emily returned to the house just as Freya, the young nanny, was bundling the twins into their coats for a walk. Freya offered a nervous smile. "They've missed you." Emily knelt and hugged both children tightly, their warm cheeks soft against hers. "We'll read tonight," she promised, kissing their foreheads. The story about the moon rabbit. Inside, she ascended the stairs to her writing room. It had been years since she'd written anything of substance. Motherhood and marriage had consumed her, but now, words itched to escape. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not a novel. Not even a journal. Just truths. The way Charles gaslit her. The way his family dismissed her. The pressure, the silences, the endless performances of contentment. A knock broke her focus. It was Freya. "There's something I think you should see," she said, voice low. Freya led her to the guest room on the second floor, usually reserved for Rupert or visiting business associates. She pulled open a drawer and handed Emily a folder. Inside were photographs, printed, time-stamped. One showed Rupert speaking with a man outside a legal office in London. Another showed him at a private club known for its influence in judicial circles. But the final photo was the one that chilled Emily. Rupert and Charles. Shaking hands. Smiling. And behind them, on the desk, lay the same document Emily had given to Edward. "How did they?" she whispered. Freya's eyes welled up. "I think they've been watching you for longer than you know." Emily clutched the folder, her hands trembling, but not with fear. With fury. Her safe space was gone. Her every move monitored. Her truth, at risk of being turned against her. But it was not the end. It was her beginning. She turned to Freya and said, "I need your help. And I need you to be very brave." Downstairs, Charles poured himself another drink, humming an old tune as if nothing had changed. But change was coming. And this time, it had Emily's name all over it. The air in Bath's Whitmore Gallery smelled faintly of oil paint and old wood. The late afternoon sun cast slanted golden beams through the high windows, illuminating delicate frames and canvas textures. Clara Whitmore stood behind the main counter, cataloguing a new arrival, when Emily entered. Clara looked up, surprised but calm. You've come. Emily didn't waste time. She placed the folder of photographs on the counter. They're planning something, Clara. Something calculated. Clara flipped through the images slowly, eyes narrowing with each turn. These are damning. But they won't matter unless you control the narrative. Emily's voice cracked. They're trying to frame me as unstable. Irresponsible. They've got Rupert planting things, Charles twisting my words, and his mother hovering like a hawk. Clara nodded. Then you'll need to be 10 steps ahead. The gallery was quiet apart from the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Emily walked to the center of the room, looking at a large abstract canvas, white with slashes of charcoal gray. It reminded her of silence interrupted. Like her life. I've started writing again, she said softly. Clara smiled. Good. Let them fear your voice. That evening, back at the Thornton estate, Emily began rearranging. Not the furniture, but the narrative. She called Edward Langford. We need to meet in person. Somewhere public. Somewhere visible. They met at the Royal Crescent Hotel, a known spot for legal professionals and old Bath families. It was a calculated move, visible enough to draw attention, but discreet enough to avoid eavesdropping. Edward arrived carrying a leather case and an expression of concern. They filed an initial request. Custody evaluation. They're painting you as mentally unfit. Emily didn't flinch. Let them. Edward opened the case and revealed a counterplan. Witnesses. Character testimonies. Records of Charles's absences, his late-night dealings, even offshore accounts Emily never knew existed, until now. You've been clever, Edward said, watching her. But this is going to be war. Are you ready for that? She met his eyes, steady. I was never unready. I was just silent. That night, Emily walked the halls of Thornton House, watching the children sleep, then locking her writing room. She installed a new camera, her own this time, facing the desk. She was going to feed them the story they wanted. And then burn it. Meanwhile, Rupert sat across from Charles in the study again, this time less composed. She's stirring too much dust. She's not cracking. Charles sipped his scotch, gaze cool. Let her dance. She'll step wrong eventually. But as the rain began to fall once more outside, a silent truth crept into the corners of the room. Emily wasn't dancing. She was choreographing. And the stage she was building. It was theirs. London's rain had a way of smearing everything, car lights, hurried footsteps, intentions. Emily arrived at Edward Langford's office with her umbrella dripping, her coat clinging to her arms like wet paper. The receptionist glanced up, recognized her instantly, and ushered her through without a word. Edward was waiting with a file already open. We've traced the shell accounts. Thornton Pharmaceuticals has a subsidiary operating out of Malta. Payments. Disbursements. Quiet transfers. Emily sat down. How long has he been hiding it? Long enough to explain the missing hours. Long enough to raise questions in a court that actually cares. He handed her a printed sheet. Black ink, numbered entries, foreign addresses. Proof. I want to use this, Emily said. But not yet. Edward raised an eyebrow. You're playing a longer game. I'm not going to fight the divorce anymore. Let Charles file. Let him think he's ahead. Edward leaned back, calculating. You want to give him the illusion of control. And then I'll flip it. Meanwhile, in Surrey, Charles Thornton was enjoying his apparent upper hand. Rupert had reported back that Emily's schedule was calm, that she had stopped visiting the gallery, that her legal meetings had slowed. Charles took this as weakness. She's folding, he said smugly to his mother one evening. She knows she can't win. Lady Thornton sipped her tea without looking up. She was always too soft. Back in Bath, Emily was composing her next act. Her writing returned, sharper than ever, disguised as fiction, but every word a blueprint. She printed chapters and left them in places Charles would never think to check, in her late father's books, under the crib mattress, in a recipe folder marked beef stew. Every page told a version of the truth, coded, dramatic, brilliant. She even delivered a copy to Clara, who immediately spotted the hidden confessions. "You're feeding the world your story." Emily nodded. "If they want to discredit me, let them read what they think is madness." "But it's not madness," Clara whispered. "It's proof." One late afternoon, as Emily was reviewing legal documents, Freya entered the study. "There's someone at the door," Freya said. "He says he used to work with Mr. Thornton." Emily went cold. "His name?" "George," Freya replied. "George Linton." The name cracked open a memory. George had once been Charles's most loyal fixer, then vanished during a financial scandal. Now, here he was, in the doorway, rain clinging to his coat, eyes cautious. "I don't want money," he said. "I want to clear my conscience." He placed a hard drive on the desk. Inside are voice recordings. Transfers. Conversations between Charles and Rupert. Everything you'll need. Emily stared at it. "Why now?" "Because they destroyed more than your marriage. They destroyed others too." As night fell, Emily copied the files, backed them up, encrypted them, and mailed them to Edward with no return address. Then she waited. She knew the silence wouldn't last. And she was right. 2 days later, someone broke into her writing room. But what they found wasn't what they expected. The morning after the break-in was curiously quiet. No windows smashed, no drawers ransacked, only a single boot print on the floorboards of Emily's writing room. It was almost too careful, too deliberate. Emily stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, heart steady. "They took nothing?" Clara asked, standing behind her with a cup of untouched coffee. "Nothing they could use," Emily replied. "They went for the obvious, the laptop, the folders. All empty. All planted." Freya peered from the doorway, concern lacing her voice. "You knew they would come." Emily nodded slowly. "That's why I left the bait." Beneath a loose board under her writing desk was a flash drive. Not the real one, just a decoy filled with harmless pages from an old manuscript titled Inheritance of Dust, laced with passages that, at first glance, sounded incriminating. The real data was already in Edward's hands. Secured. Copied. Categorized. That evening, Charles sat in his car, gripping the drive that Rupert had retrieved. "She's messier than she lets on," he muttered, scanning over vague paragraphs and dramatic monologues. This could be used against her. But Rupert frowned. "It's too poetic. Something feels off." Charles waved it away. "She's slipping. We'll leak this. Make her look unstable." And so they did. 2 days later, an anonymous blog post appeared, claiming that Emily Thornton was an emotionally volatile woman disguising her delusions as fiction. A few subtle nudges sent the article viral among gossip columns and a certain circle of legal observers. Emily read it with a calm smile. "Let them. Every word they're using is part of the script I wrote for them," she said to Clara. But the tide was shifting. One by one, quiet whispers turned into cautious glances. People who had doubted Emily began to wonder. The blog post seemed too timely. Too crafted. Too convenient. Then, Edward received a tip-off. "A journalist wants to meet you," he told Emily. "She's been following Thornton's business dealings for years. Says she's got her own recordings." Emily agreed. They met in a quiet cafe in Soho. The journalist, Meredith Hale, was sharp-eyed and brisk. I've got 2 hours of audio, Meredith said. Charles, Rupert, and 2 investors. They talk about using family ties to deflect scrutiny. They mention threats. Even you. Emily leaned forward. Why bring this to me? Because when the same man who discredited me a decade ago starts using the same tricks again, same lies, same smear campaigns, I know something big is at stake. Meredith slid a recorder across the table. And just like that, the final piece locked into place. Back in Surrey, Charles received a summons. A formal court date. The kind that comes with weighty implications. His solicitor looked pale. She's pressing back. Charles threw the recorder across the room. She's bluffing. No, sir, the solicitor said quietly. She's building a case. A strong one. That night, Charles called Rupert. Destroy everything. Files. Emails. George, if he resurfaces. I want no trail. But Rupert didn't respond. His number was disconnected. Emily already knew why. Because Rupert wasn't just running. He was bargaining. With someone far more dangerous than Charles ever suspected. The courtroom was packed. Not with press, Emily had ensured privacy orders, but with people who mattered, her solicitor, Edward by her side, Clara seated behind her, and Meredith Hale scribbling notes, calm as ever. Charles sat across from her, flanked by 2 barristers and a scowl etched deep into his face. He looked less powerful now. Smaller somehow. Like a man who finally realized the ground beneath him wasn't just shaking, it had caved in. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Emily did not flinch as evidence was laid out, transaction records, manipulated accounts, threatening emails linked to burner phones, and finally, Meredith's recordings, meticulously authenticated. Charles's team objected at every turn, but the walls were closing in. Then, the twist. A new voice echoed through the speakers in the courtroom. Rupert's voice. You think she'll stay quiet once the twins are born? She won't. She'll talk. Then we make her look unstable. Take the children if we must. Gasps filled the room. Emily sat still, composed. Charles turned white. Rupert had vanished weeks earlier, but Emily had known where he'd go. She'd traced him to an offshore property registered under a false name, and had someone waiting. He had sung like a choir boy, especially when offered immunity in exchange. And that immunity had come with receipts. At the end of the day, Charles Thornton was not dragged out of court. He did not weep or beg. He signed a settlement agreement. One that stripped him of controlling interest in the family trust. One that awarded Emily full custody. And one that barred him from speaking publicly about the case, on pain of perjury. Outside, rain drizzled softly. Emily stepped into it, tilting her face to the sky. Clara opened the umbrella over them, but Emily waved it off. I want to feel it, she said. The end. No, Clara said with a quiet smile. It's the beginning. Months later, in the Sussex countryside, Emily sat by the window of a small cottage surrounded by gardens in bloom. The twins were asleep upstairs. Edward visited often, now a trusted friend. Clara had opened a modest legal practice for women escaping abusive marriages. And Emily? She was writing again. Not to survive, but to remember. Because in every ending, there is a reckoning. And in every reckoning, a woman finds her voice again.